Hi everyone, thank you so much for being here today for Dovetail Learning's webinar on understanding others, why people see the world so differently. My name is Chuck Fisher, I'm the Executive Director at Dovetail Learning. I'm a transpersonal psychologist, which is the study of well-being from all cultures cross-culturally. And this webinar is of course brought to you by Dovetail Learning, whose mission is to strengthen resilience in adults and children so that we can help make the world a better place. A little background on Dovetail. We produce open education resources, which means they are free for all. You can download and adapt our work. We just ask that you give attribution, collaborate, share back, and this is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike. So if you publish anything with our work, you're required to share it as a free open education resource also. Just a little bit more about me. I'm so interested in culture and enculturation and cross-cultural understanding. I love this view of the world. It's just, we are a world filled with people from all walks of life on all continents. And partly interested in this because I'm a third culture kid, which is what a child is called if they've had seminal years in other cultures. I grew up in the Philippines and in Peru, and I care about kids and care about these kids who are my grandkids. I want to make the world a better place. And this kid who is me at age 3 in the Philippines, and it's really about bringing in the healing of children, and that included my own healing over many years from adverse childhood experiences. So what we're going to do today is look at one part of the We Are Resilient model or approach. The approach is made up of 2 sets of patterns, cultural patterns and protective patterns. And it's also made up of 3 sets of skills. Skills for centering, for connecting, and collaborating. We call these cultural resilience, reactive resilience, personal, relational, and group resilience. Cultural patterns help us understand how we view the world. Reactive, protective patterns are how we react to our world. And then the 3 sets of skills are how we create our world using the practices for personal resilience, relational resilience, and group resilience. So we're going to do an inquiry today into one of these, and we're going to do a spotlight on cultural resilience, which is made up of cultural patterns. And I'd invite all of us to use our resilient mindset of curiosity to just really think about what impacts our state of being. What impacts our state of being? And we like to walk our talk. So what we know about learning is that if we can open our mind and our hearts to what's true here and now, it allows us to open our minds and hearts to let in what's true about our cultural patterns, our reactive patterns, our way of being in the world. So I'd just like to invite everybody to pause for a moment. I'm going to ring this bell. Ask you to just close your eyes if you're open to it and take a breath. And use that pause, use the breath simply to create space for learning. Open space. And in this space of noticing our breaths, just be aware about your current state of being in this moment. Anything from stressed, overwhelmed, curious, interested, peaceful, relaxed, open. And invite everyone back to the presence of me and this webinar, and ask you simply to chat in a word or a phrase about your state of being right now, so we can just calibrate. My word is interested and curious. Oh, and I'm seeing some messaging here. It looks like the chat feature is turned off. Thank you, those of you who are writing in with the question guidance there. My apologies for that. We're going to have to skip that piece, and we'll just notice what we notice. Notice that we have a state of being, and our state of being is impacted by many things. And one of the things is what we call cultural patterns. How we view the world. So cultural patterns, what the heck are cultural patterns? Cultural patterns are enculturated beliefs passed down intergenerationally. They're basically inherited beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors. They inform our identity, so much so that sometimes we're completely unaware of our cultural patterns. They are like water is to fish. So let's look at the different types of cultural patterns and get a little bit more of a sense of that. So we all have family patterns about what's okay to talk about, what kind of emotions we have in the family, family stories, about how the world works. I grew up in a very dysfunctional alcoholic family. I was the lost child in an alcoholic family, had adverse childhood experiences like emotional, physical, sexual abuse, things that impacted me deeply. Those are all created patterns in me that came out of the family patterns, the family cultures that went way back generations. Community norms, the things that are norms in our community, in my community here in northwestern California. It's a very liberal community. People wear masks. There are many other communities across the country and the world where it's just not a norm to wear masks. It's for COVID, obviously. Very different norms of behavior, norms of how close we get to each other. In Asian countries, I might be face to face with somebody. In North America, it's often, in European countries, there's quite a bit of distance that we keep from each other. So community norms. Construct of race, what we even understand or think about race, which is very different across the world. Race, of course, was made up. There is no such thing as race where there's different colored skin, but the idea that races are different has been debunked. Gender identification, religious tradition, ethnicity, political affiliation, our sexual orientation, all of these impact how we think about the world, what our beliefs are about the world, how we experience the world, and our sense of identity to the world. So cultural patterns have some very important things that they give us. They help us deeply. They give us our core values. Values like kindness or caring, community. These things are passed down to us. They give us shortcuts to understand and navigate the world. Those people who are similar in my culture, I can navigate that with people who are like me very easily because we're all alike. I can go to a completely different culture and I can put my foot in my mouth, immediately by using customs or patterns that that culture doesn't use. So cultural patterns give me those kinds of shortcuts, and they give me a deep sense of belonging to a group with whom I feel safe. And also the incredible opportunities for celebration, for strength. Think about celebration that happens, at marriages and funerals, celebrations that come with holidays or with religious traditions. Those are all cultural patterns that help us to be strong and stable and connected. Well, cultural patterns can also get in the way of our resilience. Very deeply, they can get in our way. They can completely blind us to someone else's truth, cause judgments that short circuit our relatedness, perpetuate lack of access to health and wealth, depending on privilege, and alter our health behaviorally and genetically, which is very clear in scientific research that our beliefs, attitudes, behaviors, adverse childhood experiences, of course, impact people behaviorally, genetically, and long-term health, as does eating patterns, and whether we exercise or not. These are all things that get passed down to us. So, as a shortcut, let's look at cultural patterns and what they do to harm us and help us. Generally, the harm comes from this sense that there's fear in the world. It can inform our fear, our despair, our doubt, our anxieties for sure. Often comes from trauma. It informs bias, or unconscious bias specifically, as well as very overt bias, discrimination, racism. All of those things are harmful, and that get passed down intergenerationally as enculturated thoughts and beliefs. How I think about something depending on where I've grown up, and the family I've lived in, and the church I had, or the synagogue or mosque, completely changes how I think, feel, and hear. And of course, on the positive side, those things teach me about love, hope, trust, affinity. They also teach me my values around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what I like to think of as the continuum here, the emotional continuum, really, from fear to love. Those are two ends of the emotional spectrum. And cultural patterns, attitudes, beliefs, and what becomes possible are all informed by that continuum, that emotional continuum. So if you think about yourself or people you know or people who you don't get along with, when we understand cultural patterns, we can see that every single human being has absolutely impeccable reasons for being, behaving, thinking, understanding exactly the way that they do. And I love this quote from Carl Jung. He says, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life, and you will call it fate." The unconscious conscious. I want to go back a slide because there was a story I wanted to tell. I have a family member who is on the other side of the political spectrum. I'll be totally transparent. I'm a liberal, and I believe in COVID, and I believe in democracy, the way that I think about it. But I have a family member who is ever Trumper and doesn't believe in COVID and doesn't believe in climate change. And I just know that this family member, I understand why and how they are the way they are. And we'll talk about that in terms of how the rational mind creates stories to support our beliefs. But it's unconscious until it becomes conscious. And one thing that's often unconscious is the emotional impact. So what are the inherited emotional habits from your ancestors or anyone's ancestors? Being having ancestors from Europe, Scotland specifically, the structures of the old European way of, at least in the more recent past, of closing down emotions. It wasn't okay to feel emotions. My mom told me, don't feel that way. Chuck, when I got upset about something. Oh, don't feel that way, honey. Tried to gloss over it. I shut down my emotions, armored myself so much that I didn't cry when I was a young man. It took me a lot of therapy and in inner contemplation and body somatic work to get to a point where I could really access my emotions. The whole spectrum here from this chart's from the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. Um, Angry, sad, happy, calm, the broad emotions of happy to calm, and the narrow emotions from angry to sad. What did you inherit? My father was a very angry person, and he would explode, and it took me a long time to figure that out and get through it and get over it myself. It was inherited from a family pattern. So emotional impact, it's quite revealing, and comes from family, religion, race, addictions. The addictions that get passed down are often inherited, and they are ways in which we keep ourselves from feeling our emotions and the worldviews that we have. So when we think about inheriting emotional patterns, we'll also inherit stress patterns. I talked about my father. He lost his cool a lot. Go along, stress event, reaction, have a protective pattern kick in. His was being angry and attacking, and that will peak and calm down, eventually deplete one. And we can learn through skillful means and the skills of resilience to manage our stress curves. We can notice our protective patterns and wonder and assess them and choose resilient skills. So back to cultural theory for a moment, because cultural theory is, this dictum that it's culture and psyche or mind that make each other up. What I am enculturated with and what I think create what I believe. So this is combining an anthropologist's love of context and what psychologists love, which is understanding mental processes. So cultural theory puts all of this together so we can understand that what happens in the culture and what we think in our minds puts the pieces together. And as this quote from Krishnamurti speaks to, we think we're thinking our own thoughts when in fact we're thinking our culture's thoughts. What I think, what I say about the climate, about science, about religion comes through the culture. And people who think about those things in completely different ways than I do, they think that way because of how they were enculturated. So if we look at this from the lens of unconscious bias, we have worldview lenses, and one example of deeply enculturated patterns are the three different types of worldviews that people hold. And some of this comes from this book by Jonathan Haidt, The Righteous Mind. And the three basic patterns that people hold are individualistic, autonomous, a pattern where I think that I am myself, separate from you, I'm autonomous, I can go about my world living that way, separated from nature. Other people make their own choices about things. The second view is a sociocentric, related viewpoint. If we think about large cultures, they're deeply sociocentric. Places like India and Japan, where the common good, behavior is all related to how to help the common good occur together. And the third lens is what's called divinity or inseparability. So some might call it a spiritual perspective, that there is no separation, that every thing I do impacts everything around me. Everything around me impacts me. Um, and it turns out that those of us in the Western world um, uh, can be called the weirdest people in the world. This comes from Heinrich Heine and Noren Zion, a 2010 study of different cultures and enculturated pieces. And the way they define weird is Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and from democracies. So the weirder you are, the more you perceive a world full of separate objects and separate people. The whole notion that separatism, the United States, has going on, and part of that other countries as well. It's like we are on our own. We need to take care of ourselves. We're not part of the whole world. That's all individualistic, autonomous thinking that comes out of the weird culture. And if we take that more into the personal domain, we're going to use this metaphor of the rider and the elephant. This also is one that I've learned from Jonathan Haidt, and that is that the rider on top of the elephant is the rational mind, and the elephant is our intuitive, holistic body, emotional self. Well, it turns out that the elephant is what is enculturated. All of our movements in the world are driven by this huge animal we might call the elephant, which is impacted by unconscious bias and beliefs and patterns. So that as I'm going through the world, my elephant is turning me in all kinds of different directions. It might turn me towards racism, might turn me towards being a climate advocate. It might turn me towards, spending my life in service to others. Might turn me into a separatist militia member. But the elephant is in charge. And the rational, the rider, what we think is in charge, is actually not in charge at all. What we're thinking about is our rational mind produces stories and thoughts and ideas simply to confirm what our elephant is doing, not because we're actually driving the elephant. So this is just a short way of saying enculturation matters. Enculturation, our biases, beliefs, attitudes, behaviors are deeply embedded in us in an unconscious way. And it's helpful to be aware of that. So how do we turn toward proficiency, in cultural proficiency? It could be a proficiency around understanding how we're enculturated to be more of the kind of person we most want to be. We do that through courage, and the courage to face what's true, what's in our realm of understanding. And again, cultural resilience is one of the 5 kinds of resilience that we illuminate and teach at Dovetail. And when we use the practice model coach methodology, which is also part of what we teach, we begin by practicing it ourselves. We get curious and notice when our own cultural patterns are kicking in, when they're influencing us. When I have a thought or a reaction, think about how it comes from your culture. It's only by practicing that internally myself, working at myself, that I can then learn how to model it for others. And in this case, modeling cultural resilience is when I am influenced by a cultural pattern, to name my bias for other people, be self-disclosing about that, and helping other people understand what I'm doing to help and harm. And it's only through practice and modeling that then we can get the expertise of a coach to listen for others' potential cultural patterns, to be compassionate for how and why they got to be the way they are, and to reflect back what we hear. And we do that using the resilient mindsets. Oh, I see it. My slide has got a little mistake here. Starting with curiosity about what I don't know and how I'm being. thinking about choice, what empowering choice can I make, and then using courage to ask the question, well, what would love do in this situation? If I'm in relationship with my family member who's on the other side of the divide, and um, you know, if I can just love him, it changes everything, because I can then be with him in all the ways that matter most. And we call this skillfully managing our stress. We stay cool, we anticipate what's going to happen, we use our resilience skills, we use our courage, and we can stay centered and in relationship. The most important of our resilience attributes and skills, relational resilience. So bringing this all full circle, we use our curiosity, choice, and courage in all of our patterns and skills so that we can be the kind of person that we want to be and help others do the same. So we'll close here with resources from Dovetail Learning. Go on to www.dovetaillearning.org. You can access all our open educational resources. We have a set of books with the practical skills that have most of these slides in them, and a lot more material, including science. So there's practical skills for healthcare, for educators, for families. We've got tons of video learning on our YouTube channel, and a ton of digital downloads for you to use and have. So with that, we're closing this webinar. Thank you so much for being here. Please reach out to me, Chuck, at dovetaillearning.org if you have any specific questions. And again, appreciate you being here.